let's start with black and white Game Boy games. Games like these were really common, games that were released for the NES and then made a slightly simpler version for the Game Boy. But games like DuckTales, it's a really fun game, even when compared to the better NES version. Battletoads, not so much. So Super RC Pro-Am is also a fun game, even on a Game Boy. Well, Fortress of Fear, that's exclusive for the Game Boy, but it's not as hot. It's really really sticky with the controls. Geeks is a fantastic puzzle game. It's been released with many different names for many different consoles, but it's really playable on the Game Boy. And of course, who can forget the Super Mario Land games. The first one, it was a bit different than other Mario games because Mario was so small and the controls were a bit different, whereas Super Mario Land 2 6 Golden Coins was a bit closer to other Mario games on the NES. And then the series turned to Wario Land, but it's still subtitled Super Mario Land 3, if you can see that. For the Game Boy Color, I don't have that many games, but Metal Gear Solid is a classic game for the Color. Really good gameplay. If you like the NES or MSX versions, you really need to check out the Game Boy Color version. Really good plot there. Perfect Dark, the companion for the N64 game, not that much in common. This is a top-down action game, not a first-person shooter naturally, but it's curious. This has a rumble feature on the cart here. Let's see if I can get it out. Taking a while, sorry about that. The cartridge has a place for a battery here, and then there's a rumble motor which rumbles when you shoot or stuff, so that's pretty cool. Then on to Game Boy Advance. Now these aren't in any order, so I'll just pull them from the stack as I go along. WarioWare, a really classic game, one of the best new game series that originated on the Game Boy Advance, and really a phenomenon by now. And WarioWare Twisted, which had the big cartridge with a motion sensor way before the Wii, and you can tilt the cartridge and the machine and play the mini games with that. Mega Man 04. There were 4 awesome Mega Man games, really good, even though I still like the X series better. Astro Boy, Gunstar Superheroes. This is a really good duo of action games, part developed by Treasure, from Ikaruga and Radiant Silvergun fame. Really classic 2D action. Astro Boy in particular really surprised me in a positive way, and Gunstar Future Heroes is a continuation of the Mega Drive classic. And Metal Slug Advance, it's quite different from the original Neo Geo Metal Slugs, partly because it's on a much in a system that hasn't had that much processing power. It's a bit puzzly, and it has a bit more adventure than in the straight up action games. Really good. The NES Classic series, I only have one, and that's still sealed. Pac-Man, but nothing wrong there. Polarium Advance, that's still sealed. I have it on the DS and have played it to death from its launch date, but this is more of the same. Just haven't had the time to open it. Fire Emblem, there were 2 or 3 Fire Emblems for the GBA. Not all of them were translated into English, but this is really more of the same classic Fire Emblem. It doesn't change at all when you put it into two dimensions where it started. Doom, quite a good conversion, especially on way back when this was introduced. It was really something to have FPS games on the Game Boy Advance. Mario and Luigi, Superstar Saga. This was a really good surprise when it first came out. A really funny RPG made in the vein of Paper Mario. You should really check this out. And third game coming for DS pretty soon. Tales of Phantasia, one of the biggest disappointments in the Super Nintendo era was that this never got translated into English, and now here it is on Game Boy Advance. Check it out. Then the Golden Sun series, this is really one of my favorites, and again one of the most important games the Game Boy Advance introduced. I'm really looking forward to the third game coming on DS. And on Golden Sun The Lost Age, it was really fun to have a paper map again, reminiscent of old Final Fantasy games or stuff like that. So this was a really good surprise to find in the game box. I also have one still sealed. Got it cheap one day and just gonna keep it sealed because I have one copy to play here. Same thing with Metroid Fusion and Metroid Zero Mission. Really good 2D action games. You know, you really can't have too much 2D Metroid or 3D Metroid for that matter, but these are truly one of the best games on the Game Boy Advance. Then on to Final Fantasy. Now they have released the whole series of the NES and Super Nintendo games. I only have 1 and 2 and 6 here, but planning to get the rest of the games. Oh, sorry, number 3 is still missing, but they released it for the DS. Final Fantasy Tactics Advance are really clocked in dozens of hours on this, so really one of the best. I might even say it's better than Fire Emblem on the Game Boy Advance as a strategic RPG. And then a really significant trio of games, well, same thing as the Metroid games, 2D Castlevania. It doesn't get better than this, and Game Boy Advance has 3 of these little blessings, so this is really a tour de force for Game Boy Advance. Good games, each and every one of them. I also have some Japanese games. Now, Mother 3, it was coming 7 years for the Nintendo 64 as a 3D RPG, but it got cancelled. Well, finally they released it for the Game Boy Advance in a really different 2D form, but it's cool, we finally had this. And this is the sequel to Kuru Kuru Kururin, which was one of the launch games for the Game Boy Advance. Really one of the gem puzzlers for the Game Boy Advance. Now, Bit Generations is a series of 7 games which were sold for pretty cheap originally, and they all revolve around some basic premise. They're basically puzzle games, all of them, but they take one simple premise and expand upon that. You know, they're color puzzles and motion puzzles and all sorts of things. You can find these pretty cheap nowadays, so check it out. Sound Voyager is a really nice game. It can basically be played by the blind, or if you close your eyes, you can just use your ears for this one. So this is a really unique video game for that. And in case someone missed them already, of course I have all the Zelda games for all the consoles here. Let's see how I can fit them all here. The original Link's Awakening and its Color DX form, the two games for the Game Boy Color, Oracle of Seasons, or Oracle of Ages, developed by Capcom, and then they did a fantastic job at that. And then the remake of the Super Nintendo game, Link to the Past, and the last for the Game Boy Advance, Minish Cap. Again, I think I'm repeating myself with the Metroid and the Castlevania games, but it just doesn't get any better than this 2D Zelda games. Every bit of good as than the first Zelda or Zelda Link to the Past, all of these, and really shining examples what the Game Boy series, what Game Boy itself has to offer, whether it is black and white or Game Boy Advance. So if you don't still have a Game Boy Advance, you're really missing out on the best games. It's not just a portable game system, it's one of the best game systems ever. And a Game Boy Advance SP can play them all, black and white, color, and Game Boy Advance games. Well, thanks for your time.